So welcome to episode 6. Yes, it's 6 so far of the Retooled podcast that we now know and love as we love ugly data. Alan's back again for this episode. We're in that nice part of the year, or nasty part of the year, depending on what your bent is, where there isn't a huge number of conferences or announcements. Europe's likely gone on holiday, not the UK. So we're actually kind of like heavy into writing mode at the moment, which we'll come to in a little way. But part of that is if we get into our kind of format, again, just to remind you, 3 topics, 30 minutes. You probably know this by now. We'll get straight to the first one, which is we published 5 more vendor vignettes, Alan.
We have indeed. And in fact, it was going to be 7 at one point, but we just decided just to get these out the door. So there's more coming is the point. Yeah, we did. And this is the first batch, which it's fortunate, unfortunate, be sort of, behind the firewall for our subscribers, but we can definitely talk about them on this podcast because there's some interesting ones in there.
And there is a analyst note. So if you want to get a little preview of what they are, obviously, only for subscribers to read the whole thing, but you can get from the analyst note. There's 5 vendors to watch, but for the purposes of the podcast, we can run through a little bit of them, those new ones which are on there. I'll take one to start off with, which is Solonis, which we haven't actually covered before as a vendor vignette, but they are probably the biggest vendor, the biggest independent vendor, probably the biggest vendor, period, that we cover that probably exist, and it certainly exists within the work intelligence market. In fact, when we looked at the work intelligence market and we were doing the market sizing last year, they're the only one of the mining vendors, process and task, that kind of crack the top 10, which, given that a lot of the others are big, long-standing vendors, them cracking in as an independent is quite interesting. Why they're interesting particularly now? Well, one is their size and their domination of the market. 2, if you're new to the idea of process and task mining, and I know they're different, and I'm molding them together because the company covers both. If you're new to that and they explain to you the idea of object-focused analysis, you go, well, of course, that's brilliant. Hasn't it always worked like that? It should have always worked like that. And you go, yes, but it hasn't. So if you want to understand what the difference is between the kind of case focus and object focus, that's explained inside that. And probably I should write something about that anyway when I've got through the 1,000 things on my list. So that's Solonis. Maybe, Alan, you want to talk about Acceptor?
Yeah, Acceptor. I met them early this year, late last, I can't remember now. I remember it was winter anyway, up in New York. Really interesting company, and particularly interesting for us and our subscribers, because they're not the kind of software company we come across all the time, if we're being perfectly honest, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a very well-known company in financial services, right? Particularly reconciliations, capital markets, etc. But you know what, when you dig beneath the covers, and this is a compliment to them, by the way, really, what are they doing? They're processing unstructured data, right? Mm-hmm. But they're doing it at pace. They're doing it in a highly regulated way, and they're growing. And so, are they an IDP vendor? I don't know, but they're an interesting one. And they're just an example, if you like. They're a pretty nice company, actually, as well, I'd have to say. They're nice people. But they're an example that we're too often blinkered when we think about these markets, right? That this stuff is going on all over the place. We often talk about document management as if it's a little discrete market, but people are managing documents all over the place in all sorts of different ways. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's an interesting read, though, Acceptor.
So if I take on, let's say, Salesforce AI Cloud, which is, kind of interesting, Salesforce, interesting company for all sorts of reasons. And if I pick up my phone on a daily basis, they are never out of my news feed. But specifically here, why this is interesting is that they've kind of taken on 2 things kind of front and center in how they're approaching this. They've gone straight for hey, we understand privacy might be an issue. It's an issue for us too. And we're going to front and center exactly how we're dealing with that, which is probably necessary. It's probably brave, and they're probably at the same time doing a service for a lot of other maybe more timid vendors who don't necessarily want to fess up where some of the challenges are right now. And secondarily, they're again also talking very openly about how they're doing the kind of grounding process, which is basically using large language models along with your own data and molding them together to produce responses that meet your requirements. It's a whole big area. I'm actually in the middle of writing something right now, a little bit broader about the sort of desktop and Gen AI movement right now, with some sort of how-to guides, and that as part of that. That's kind of an ongoing process, which is why it's top of mind. But that's an interesting, well, I would say I wrote it, but it's an interesting vignette in itself, whether you're interested in Salesforce or not, but certainly around the ideas of privacy, data residency, and data grounding. So AYR, AYR.
AYR, I'm going to be absolutely honest. I'm not completely sure how it's pronounced. I met these people up in Philly. A nice lunch, actually, at Park in Rittenhouse Square.
Well, obviously, very good lunch. I can't remember how to pronounce the company name. But
yeah, our lunch was great. Now they're a nice bunch, and they're based in Princeton, New Jersey. And I'd have to say this is, from an AI sort of document processing perspective, they are definitely one of the more advanced. And again, I think those Princeton connections, Yale connections, et cetera, probably come through here. But yeah, we won't talk too much about this one, but it is a multimodal sort of approach. Back to your point on Salesforce, I think what's interesting with AIR is that they're pointing this out, and a lot of others who maybe are doing something a little similar, they like to position AI as this magical little box that just works, and this company is sort of a bit more open about, hey, there's a lot going on here to get these things to work. So hats off to them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we'll probably come back to this a little bit later on, assuming I remember, which is we're at the point where for an awful lot of organizations, they've bought a toolbox and they've started to fill it with tools. And the first tool they're thinking about buying is a hammer. So a lot of their solutions at the moment are going, well, I bought this hammer. It's the only tool I've got. Therefore, it's the most appropriate tool to hand. And that's something I think a theme that we'll come back to time and time again. But I think it's something that we're seeing across a lot of these AI-related things right now. And finally, amongst this sort of release is UiPath, but particularly UiPath, what they call their discovery tools. So very much their sort of task mining and process mining kind of tools. We talked a little bit, and I know we covered this again when we were talking about the work intelligence report last year, about how RPA, which of course is, people will know, is sort of UiPath sort of stock in trade, how that really needs to almost drag along a little bit the process tools. But at the same time, the use of the process tools is likely to have a significant impact on how you do your RPA development, your RPA pipeline, and the ongoing success of how you measure how successful your RPA has been. And I know we both sat in on that. I thought that was a kind of interesting thing, and UiPath's probably got a nice, quite interesting story, quite a holistic story about how all that fits together right now.
They do, and very quickly, are they the only ones possibly? You've got process, task, and communication mining, right?
Yes.
Which came from the Reinfer acquisition. And if you're not familiar with that, actually, I don't actually know if it's still on the website, but we did actually do a review of that before they were acquired. It's just super interesting.
And we're probably the only people that did.
As far as I'm aware, yeah, I think we were the only ones who did.
But yeah,
it's really interesting. I'm going to be honest, when I first came across them, I couldn't figure it out. And then when the light bulb went on, I thought, oh my goodness, that is clever.
Excellent. So just to summarize there, that's 5 new vendor vignettes have gone on for subscribers. If you want to be a subscriber, trust me, there's all sorts of calls to action on the website which will enable you to do that quick, smart. And we'll come back to that next time we've got a few more on. And if you're thinking about is this a good time of the year to contact Deep Analysis to arrange a briefing? Actually, because it's quite quiet during August, it's probably a good time. So if you want something you want to talk to us about, give us a shout. Something else is a little bit self-referential. In fact, the whole thing today is quite self-referential. We're kind of relating to our own content or our own writing. Alan, you wrote an analyst note a few weeks ago about, let's just bring that up. The industry consolidation is coming, and that there's some hints and tips within that about things organizations can do perhaps to offset some of the challenges that are coming. But before we get to that, just want to give us a little bit of background about why you think consolidation is coming. What are the sort of broad market challenges which are causing these problems?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a few things, right? Whatever the exact number is, we know it's certainly not less than 500. And the number being vendors in this sort of document processing, document automation, business automation market. That's too many vendors.
Yeah,
There's just too many. And then, so that's one thing, because with that number, you're always going to have some consolidation. That's just life, right? But then you've got, is it a triple whammy or a double whammy? We'll see as I go through them. I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3. But one, there was a ton of money 5 years ago, and everybody raised it. We had a pandemic, and depending on where you are, a recession or the perception of a recession, guess what? Those investors want their money back, please. They want a return on their investment. Yeah, I mean, so the time frame for getting the money, burning through it, and turning a profit or finding an exit has shrunk. So you've got some hungry investors, hungry for their money back and some profits.
And there's less private equity money around for an exit. So actually, transactions to private equity and private equity to private equity transactions are significantly reduced. I think it's a nice way of putting it.
That's a nice way of putting it. IPOs are rare. So it's just a tough spot. There is a positive here. There's a couple of positives. I mean, one, in that note, we did genuinely try to say, well, yeah, but it's not all doom and gloom. We're not going to name who's who and what markets are worse than others, but our marketplace is actually pretty vibrant compared to many others, which is not, you know, it's a bit worrying. But yeah, the biggest thing here is, and I think these are the 2 points really, is you know, yeah, it's a bit quieter in August, but we've still got multiple briefings every week, and we always will have, and that's cool. But, and I'm not going to name and shame, but it's just tiresome hearing vendors going on and on and on about their technology and saying nothing about why somebody should actually buy it, what value it's going to bring.
Do you think that's because that's what they think analysts want to hear as much as, or do you think that actually that's their general pitch?
I think in many cases that's their general pitch. Okay. I was on one this week. Oh, such nice people, and nobody's going to buy that product. Why should I? Right. And so I pulled up that quote from the Financial Times to say clients want expert advisors is to confuse process and outcome. Patients don't want doctors, they want good health.
Yes.
Well, exactly. Tell me how you're going to save me some money. Tell me how you're going to do something better. And seriously, so many, particularly startups, really struggle to do that.
So again, it's thinking about who you're buying. I mean, this is kind of like sales 101. I don't necessarily feel like I'm patronizing people who are listening or watching this, but thinking about who you're selling to, thinking about who's going to pay it, thinking about whose budget it is, and thinking about what is their bonus based on. These are fairly simple ways of thinking about it. There are very few, and certainly probably less than there have been in previous years, very few people who are users of technology who have technology only budgets to spend. Well, and if you're making top line impact and hopefully bottom line impact, ultimately you're not going to get appointments.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to improve their businesses. How are you going to help them do that? I mean, that's it in a nutshell. But then the other thing, and this is maybe not as common, but it's worryingly common, particularly startups, I suspect, who have overpromised seed and Series A, right? Oh, we're going to take out Pega. Oh, we're going to take out OpenText. They've been around too long. Whatever. That is not going to happen. These are multi-billion-dollar companies who could shut up shop tomorrow, sell no more new licenses, and still reap in billions, if not billions a year on maintenance fee. You ain't taking them out anytime soon. And again, you know, focus, back to what we were saying, focus on customers, focus on markets which aren't fully, you know, or maybe aren't even penetrated at all at the moment, right?
That being said, we've said this before, so I'm not breaking any cookie confidence here about, say, our relationship with Big G. There's enough for us to eat from the crumbs off their table. and the same is the true of anybody in the market which you're in. There are going to be elements that they're shedding, either from losing contracts or things that aren't a perfect fit where you're a niche fit will give you just enough income, just enough living right now. I wonder sometimes when small startup in a bracket starts talking about how they're going to take big one in a bracket, and sometimes feel, am I less on a briefing and more of a sales kickoff? And what? In the sales kickoff, there's no harm in looking upwards and punching up and deciding who you're going to punch up, if that's a way of really adding energy to your sales force or your partners or anything like that, to say, that's our focus, that's who we're chasing, that's who we're marketing ourselves to.
But it also becomes a sort of self-fulfilling thing, in the sense that, if you're put into a magic quadrant, if you put into a wave or whatever versions of the Boston Square people come up with, it's easy to believe that's your market. Well, again, Acceptor, I don't think they describe themselves as an IDP vendor. I'm not sure that I do either, but they're doing very similar stuff to other people, but they're doing it in a niche market, and they're doing it really, really well. And I think increasingly, if you're a startup, particularly, actually, never mind being a startup, even the larger ones, forget about these imaginary constructs, right? Forget about it. Where's the market for your product? Not where are your competitors? Yep. Because in many cases, they're not actually your competitors, right? I don't think Gartner thinks of us as a competitor.
No.
I mean, I'd be very flattered if they do. Listening to this and wants to correct me, I will take that on the chin happily. But yeah, understand your customers, understand your prospects. And we do really try to do this. We tried to do this ourselves. But, when you look back over my career, and you the same, you look at the ones that came through and were successful, right? They're the ones who did this.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones, I mean, there's no mystery. Find your niche, understand your customers and prospects. Don't worry about the competitors. Go in there and own it, whatever.
Yeah, and we would love to tell you that all of this, and with respect to, you wrote this, Adam, rather than I. I'd like to tell you, people, that this is all our own original thinking, and no one ever said this before. Not only have we said this before, collectively and individually, I don't think we were the first people who to talk about market value, not technology, not giant slave, finding niche and understand customers and prospects. These are, if they're not the first, the first principles of your go-to-market, should always be something you return to and revise on a constant basis, right?
Yeah, but it's sort of, somebody pointed out to me that I use this phrase too often, so I try not to use it anymore now. But common sense is not all that common.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we're pointing out here. But sometimes you need to do that, and it's and again, when vendors, so let's just take RPA as an example, right? You go for any bracket whatsoever. RPA vendors seem to be under the impression that the customers know what RPA is. They don't.
They don't. No, I mean, even in people I speak to, and obviously I'm not covering RPA specifically, but often I'm talking to people whose technology, the underlying technology, is similar. If you mention, of course, we're doing stuff with RPA, generally they'll go, well, what's that then?
Yeah, I mean, it's prior to pandemic when these things used to go on, but Cash App pulled together a great workshop, and I delivered it in Dallas, and it was on RPA. It was a one-day workshop, right? How to select RPA, how does it work? Da, 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 da. Here's the thing: we had a great audience that day that represented a huge amount of money, right? This was banks, this was massive government departments, this was oil and gas companies. They had all already bought RPA. That workshop was an eye-opener for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm serious. I actually seriously remember we started, I think it was at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 9 o'clock, I suggested we have a coffee break, which seemed to confuse everybody. But I needed to completely rejig those slides.
Yeah.
And really simplify things down. I don't know what they thought they bought.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think almost you could say the same. We mentioned IDP and RPA, repeatedly, because I think there's a belief that if you're listening to this on purpose and not accidentally picked it out of a random list of podcasts, you probably know what those things mean. but I think majority of those 3-letter acronyms have very little cut through with most people most of the time. And honestly, I have them written sometimes, some of these ones, on my whiteboard because I forget specifically what they're called. So someone says, you just mentioned XYZ. What does that stand for? I don't sit there going, oh, yeah, well, I actually don't know, which is actually worse than using using the term in the first place. But anyway, so on to our sort of third topic today, which is kind of, well, I've called it AI citizen developers. Again, this is a reference to something that I wrote. And as I said, right now, I'm writing an analyst report, which hopefully will be out, and I guess in a month, 6 weeks time, by the time we've finessed it, editorial, taken it apart and made my work sound good, and production design and made the graphics look good. But really looking at the sort of glut of Gen AI tools this year. One of the common questions from talking to people at conferences is just like, this is all really interesting stuff, but where do we start? So the idea is not to give you a complete toolkit of doing everything, because one, that would take far too long. And honestly, I don't think yet any of us have the skills to do that definitively because we're far too early. But here are some of the ways in which the technology is falling. These are the buckets it's falling into. Here's some of the lines of business that seem to be the focus. And here's some of the questions you should be asking yourself inside the organization about, is this the right stuff? Do we have the right understanding? And two, do we know how this is going to be a positive or negative effect, or whether it's going to be a positive or negative effect to the way in which we work? Now, one of the areas that's come up a lot during the spring, and it's kind of like a sort of dichotomy. We've got the very, very big LMMs, of which you all know the names, ChatGPT, etc., 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 the big foundations. And the majority of people who are doing stuff with this are using those. One, because they have neither the time, the resources, or frankly, the money to build them. But these are big general things. I mean, with GPT, the G means general, right? It's meant to absorb everything. What vendors are doing specifically themselves, so the ones they're building, are not going towards general stuff. They're going towards stuff which is highly proprietarized to them. And amongst 99% of them are towards the proprietary language that their software uses to help developers build them, right? So if you're everybody from somebody fairly big like Salesforce, they develop their own one for Salesforce's proprietary coding language, down to sort of mid-tier ones like Appian, Celonis we talked about earlier on, they're developing their own one. Which is, hey, we know we need to make customers successful. One of the ways in which we need to make customers successful is using our tool to the nth degree to have two positive effects. One, it makes them feel they're getting their money's worth and they'll renew. Secondarily, the more they use it, the more it ties their business into our proprietary ways of working, which makes the subscription renewal even more likely. So they're both kind of the same aim, which is so people keep giving us money. So these are sort of acts of wonderful altruism. But where this kind of collides is a lot of the same vendors have spent the last few years building their own kind of low-code and no-code platforms. So encouraging, the idea of citizen developers. So what might have been a few years ago going, yeah, it's all very well, you're talking about AI for developers but no one cares about them. There's only a few, and they sit in their socks in a darkened room and do their coding with their headphones on. Where in the meantime, we are supposed to have recruited this army of citizen developers, of business people, to go, well, I know you're shaking your head there, Alan, but yeah. Already, but this army of people who are going to come in from the businesses with no coding background and start developing things. The idea with this is that, well, rather than pairing one developer with another, we're going to pair a non-developer with a Gen AI sort of coder, so they can basically describe what they want in natural language, and the pairing coder then writes the code for you in Sail if you're in Appian world, or other other proprietary languages and other things. That's kind of the trend that we're seeing right now. You've been shaking your head a couple of times, Alan. What you're thinking during that monologue of mine?
No. I mean, so we've had this internal debate. We've had it with Dan. Dan's more enthusiastic about all this stuff than I am. And that's a healthy thing, right? Because none of us really know, right? None of us really know. So generative AI, absolutely, right? It's a big deal. Low code, no code, it's a big deal. Not questioning any of that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's, how does it hit the real world, right? How does it hit the real world? That insurance company in Europe, is it 14,000 business forms.
Yeah.
So I can see a use case there, right? Because business forms are actually quite important, and really they're mini applications a lot of the times, right? You know, very smart. I could see that. I could see that use case. Well, help a non-techie person use generative AI. You're tapping into your existing knowledge. And the next time you need to build out a form, right? I can see it. It's great. But getting somebody to build an application, I think it's just like running around a firework factory with a lighter.
I suppose looking at it from why do this now when you've already got like a code block drag and drop kind of thing? I suppose one, it's a shorter on ramp for new people, and two, it should improve the productivity of people who are already using it. And I guess, you know, one of the attractions of this in general, of these kind of, you know, I call them like sort of freedom within a framework kind of environments here, is it allows you, but nothing else, to rigidly enforce best practice, right? So rather than, you know, you're not going to end up here in theory with a whole bunch of deprecated code being generated, or, you know, maybe the not right way of doing thing, or, you know, back from when I was a developer, constantly having to fix my own memory leaks in my own code because I hadn't addressed something properly. You know, that should go away. So I think is that not part of the attractive sell for this?
It is, but you use the word building blocks, which is a great one, because low code, no code. Let's just take no code, right? What no code is is a collection of building blocks that you plop together, right? You know, drag and drop, that's what I want. But the thing is, each of those building blocks, at least in theory, each one of those is really well defined. It's really well. So your chances of really screwing up are sort of limited, right? You know, because you're using predefined, well-coded building blocks. My concern always with these kind of things, and it's even the term citizen developer, and I really wind the clock back a long time, because I was the one on the receiving end, right? There was a big deal. It would have been the late 90s. That's how far back we're going. It would have been the late 90s. Business intelligence. It was the big thing, right? Business.
I remember.
Right. And everybody said, this is amazing. Our non-technical staff now can write their own reports. And I did. And boy, I get some of them spectacularly wrong.
But interesting to pick up on that, and it's something that kind of in my head is a little bit isn't actually the risk here not that people write bad code, but the fact their understanding of the organization in which they're writing it isn't strong enough.
100%. That is the problem. So that's what I was doing to my cost. I got my fingers burnt and got told off. I came close to getting fired, actually. But what I was doing looked right to me. Right. Yeah. I was pulling fields from different things. I thought what I was doing was great. I thought it looked great, and it did look great to me. Right. When it went to a project manager who had a broader and more complex understanding of the platform, it was an oil and gas platform that we were working on. They took one look at it and go, "What the hell? That date is wrong." And I'm like, "No, the date's not wrong. It is wrong. I've taken the date field from the wrong database."
Right.
I didn't know. That's the point. I didn't know. I made an honest mistake. Look good to me.
So having decided, actually, well, one of the things that's interesting here is, hey, we're making an LLM which is based on our own proprietary code, and we can make the coding perfect. Well, that's only as good as the fact there's a lack of a proprietary model based on the organization in which it is installed. And the match of those two needs to be perfect.
You might
so again, nothing is an excuse for a lack of broader organizational knowledge, or, you know, to coin another cliche, to break outside the silo part of the organization you have to be creating your application within.
And there's no excuse for not doing proper business analysis, because you might be an SME in your department. There could be another department over there that's going to be impacted by what you're doing, and you don't even know them.
Absolutely. So we are unbelievably already up at our 30 minutes. I feel like I've been speaking without breath the entire time, so I do apologize for that. We're about to head into the start of conference season. I know that You know, that's it. Even starts in August this year. The first ones I've got, I think, in the third week of August this year. So there should be lots of newsworthy things, and not to be so self-referential next time. But be 3 more topics, another 30 minutes to discuss them in. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.